this
Recording in
joint
progress.
meeting of the Finance Committee, Select Board, and the School Committee on January 19th, 2023. Our first order of business is open forum. If anyone has anything for that. Not seeing anything. So we will dive right into our review of the FY24 budget of the Westford Public Schools, and I'll turn it over to Chris Chu.
Thank you. Can I ask if you would prefer, I can do a quick snippet highlight of the proposal that we did and then just jump into questions. What would be the easiest thing for you, Christine?
That sounds perfect.
Okay, great. Dan, would you mind if you could go to actually the slide where we talk about the adjustments, because the timeline piece, let me figure out which number that is. That'll be an easiest thing. Do you know what I'm talking about? The first couple of slides are just talking about the timeline and these dates in which we're all coming together. Perfect. Thank you. So with the first set of adjustments that we talked about when we were looking at this specific budget year was we did want to increase the substitute pay to $100 a day based on the data that we had received. We had actually previously, we had temporarily increased it to $100 a day using ARPA funds. And then in this current fiscal year, we increased it to $90 a day. And what we realized was that some of our surrounding towns, when we reduced it to 90 days from the initial increase of 100 days using the ARPA funds, again, this is from the previous year, that was based on what we thought were the comparisons around us. And then we realized that a number of our surrounding towns had also increased theirs. So we wanted to increase the substitute pay for FY24 up to $100. That's why the $36,000 increase was there. And then we did recognize a new need for a special education teacher mid-year, which was that adjustment for $54,000. And we had looked at the reductions overall to we were reducing by 6 teachers, 4 in the elementary school and 2 at the middle school based on our enrollment. So those were things that had gone into the development of our FY24 budget. Thank you, Dan. You can go to the next slide. And so some of the other considerations that we had was that we had, and this was some of the questions that had come up as well. And so I appreciate all the questions that were forwarded to us ahead of time so we could, prepare answers for them and share them back with you in advance. One of the concerns that we had recognized was that the line item for our athletic stipends was not accurately supported. The need wasn't being supported because last year we had rolled it over and we were looking at the numbers that were more associated with COVID when there weren't as many athletic opportunities taking place. And so there was a discrepancy there. So I think one of the great things, Jenny Lynn, our new director of school finance, she's really been a wonderful asset to us this year. One of the things that she had looked at was she recognized that was underfunded in our budget. And so we recognized that a more responsible approach moving forward would be to accurately reflect what the need is there. So that's why that line item increased there. We had looked over the year for a number of years. There's been an assumption of only using $312,000 of school choice offsets into the general fund. And we looked at that and we bring in more than that every single year. And we thought that it would be appropriate for us to increase that to $400,000. So that was one of the offsets there. We had also looked at the difference. We had the increase of a $5,000 offset from food services to support our business salary, the office salaries, because of the connection and the work that they do. It was an appropriate use of that offset, which we can use through food services. And then we also saw that we would be able to increase the offset that we used for the Westford Academy parking fees. The athletic, we had worked with Jeff Bunyan with our athletic revolving account as well too, and talked about increasing that as well. And we have two major concerns, right? And one of them is the fact that we still have a number of contracts that are still open, that we're still in negotiations for. And one of the things that we have been looking at that I know some people have some questions about is that there was the 14% recommendation for the increase for special education, private school special education tuitions from the state. And we're waiting to see how that plays out in the different budgets from the state, and to see if that is something that will come to fruition that we'll need to deal with. But what we chose not to do was, we didn't want to arbitrarily build that into our budget request, because we don't know if that's something that is actually going to come to fruition. So we thought the more responsible thing to do would be to keep that on our radar, but not to build in money that we might find that we don't actually end up needing there. So those are the different assumptions that have been made there. Thank you, Dan. Just as a sort of an overview and a reminder of the different revenue categories that we have, I think all of that is clearly spelled out for you. I'm not sure if everyone was able to look at that ahead of time, if we want to go through all of the different revenue categories, or if it would be more beneficial to really reserve the time for questions. What are your thoughts?
I would reserve the time for questions. I think we have some of that information.
Perfect. So what we're looking at is, and in the order of the slides, and I might have jumped to the adjustments too quickly, so I apologize for that. But if you go towards the end, Dan, it's going to remind us again what the difference is in the allocation and what our request is, which might be the more important thing for us to talk about, because then we can always go back and look at this. So the overview here is, the allocation from the town is a 2.5 increase. And when we went line by line through our budget and looked at what the needs are for FY24, what our request is for a 2.9 increase, which ends up being $65,905,323. So there is a difference of $266,174. It's something that we've been talking about. We've been talking with our town partners. We've been talking about it to look to see, okay, well, how can we bridge this gap? Unlike last year we were able to come back after we had looked at the gap, and we were able to make some additional changes and recommended some additional reductions. That is not something that I believe is possible this year. So I do not have specific reductions that I would recommend. I believe that we need to continue to collaborate to figure out where we can meet this need of the $266,174.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. I assume that's the end of your.
That is, yeah. That kind of brings us back to the basic ask.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So let's start with questions. Who has questions? Tom.
Dr. Chu, thank you for putting that together. I've been on the other side of budget discussions several times, and many times it's stated that every request is reasonable in a vacuum. Unfortunately, we do the task of this group is to recommend something that is equitable across the board. My concern is, $266,000, it's going to have to come from somewhere else, and some other department is going to have to go without something. So I just, I agree that it's going to have to be collaborative going forward. I also just want to bring back to when we were having discussions about the full day kindergarten that, you know, I know Jody raised the concern that it was going to be tough to find the money going forward. And I believe that the feeling of the finance committee was that, and at least my feeling was that it was a known issue coming and that we needed to uh, be aware of it and sharpen our pencils to get there. And I think that may be where we're at. And I completely get uh, that going line by line, it's a reasonable request. But I do think that, again, every department is coming with reasonable requests, and we just need to be aware of that.
Thanks, Tom. Dennis?
Yep. Thank you, Christina. How are you, Dr. Chu? How are you? Thanks for your effort here on this. I have two questions. The first question is, I just need to understand something here. You're asking for a 2.9% increase in the budget. And then I just want to understand, is this 260? Did you not get that as an approval? And the other thing is this 266,000 that you're referring to, is this in addition to the request that's already here, the 2.9%, or is it included in that? That's the first question.
Sure, thank you. So no, that is included in it. So in working with Jody Ross, their initial, what they had allocated to the schools was 2.5% increase. And our request is 2.9. And so the difference is the 266,000. So it's not in addition to that.
And the last question I have for now is on the reference that you made to the offsets. When you're talking about the offsets, are you talking about contributing money that you get back to the general fund or to the school budget? Can you just explain what you mean by an offset?
So, yeah, so there's a number of funding sources that we receive, whether it's grants, whether it's different fundings, different grant sources, or whether it's part of our revolving accounts, like our school choice or the transportation revolving accounts that we're able to access, that becomes an offset. So what it ends up doing is, it ends up, in some cases, it's a support that's coming from another revenue source, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't know if there's it might be there. I don't know if Jenny, if you have a better way of explaining the way that the offsets work, but because it's like I said, sometimes it comes from an internal source and sometimes it comes from an external source, but it's outside of our operating fund that is then supporting that information.
I'm just trying to determine whether or not we're gaining or losing in this process. That's all.
That's it. Dennis, honestly, that's a really good question. I got to tell you, like when I was starting to talk about offsets and the facts that grants are coming in, and then what our request is versus overall what the actual school budget ends up being at sometimes, that's an excellent question. And perhaps either Jenny or Dan might even, as the more financial experts, they might be able to chime in and explain that a little bit better.
Thank you.
Dr. Chu explained the offset in a perfect way. That means we have different revenue source to support our general funds operating budget, which help us to reduce the general funds operating budget. So that's the mean of the offset.
Okay.
Thank you, Jenny. And
that's clear. Thank you.
And I apologize because I did have the opportunity to introduce Jenny to the select board in an earlier meeting, but I would like to introduce Jenny Lynn, who is our director of school finance, who has joined us this year. She's phenomenal. She actually came to us. Her previous experience was she was a town accountant, and she's come to us and joined the schools. And so her knowledge of both sides of the different conversations has been incredibly beneficial to us. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. Nice to meet all the finance committee member. Most of the select board member I already met.
It
Thank
comes in.
you. And welcome, Jenny.
Yep,
Thank you.
welcome, welcome.
And Dennis, are you all set with your
Yep,
questions?
Yep, for now, yep.
Okay. Yeah. I'll jump in if nobody else is ready, but if somebody else is ready, I'll give you a shot. Okay, go ahead, Ingrid.
So I had two questions. A quick one regarding the amount that you put in for the D-bus contract. Did you just use what's in year 5 right now as a placeholder to be negotiated, or was there another assumption made?
There was not another assumption made. We are still waiting to work with them to figure out what this additional year would look like.
Right, so you just used right now what they bid then for year 5?
Did we use what they had bid? That's an excellent question, Jenny. Are you aware of whether we used what they had initially bid, or whether we had used a percentage of the direction in which we were heading?
Actually, we are using the direction we are heading because we are trying to negotiate the bid price down a little bit, because the bid price we got for fiscal year 23 actually is a little bit higher than we finally negotiated the price.
Right.
So our goal is to negotiate the price down from the bid price, because this is the last year. For the 3-year contract, we're gonna have 2-year option to renegotiate that. So because we have a good relationship with D-bus, hopefully we can just reduce down the bid price a little bit.
Okay. Thanks. And then I guess I will express concern about or I'd just like a further conversation about the plan for the 14% potential increase in private school out of district tuitions. I know every district in the Commonwealth is dealing with this, and it's very serious. I think it would be really helpful, hopefully, as school committee and the select board, and maybe even the finance committee here in Westford, that we contact our legislators and let them know about this. It's a lot of money, and I am a little concerned that it's not addressed completely in this budget, in the sense that we all hope that the state helps us out, but I think we need to have a backup plan.
We do, and I appreciate that, Ingrid. The only way for us to address that within this operating budget would to be making more cuts. And I think it would be unbelievably irresponsible for us to make people think that their jobs were on the line because of something that might happen at the state level. And it is something we're going to have to look at. That's why I think we have to have the conversation outside of the development of the operational budget. I agree with you completely. In all the conversations I've been having with other superintendents, we all know that this is something that it's not sustainable. The fact that it was just approved without conversations is something that is concerning. I have been, and we have been reaching out to our legislators to make sure that they're aware of the impact that this is going to have on us, and the difference of being able to respond to it if it happens. The commissioner did tell all of the superintendents in a meeting a few weeks ago, actually it might have been a month ago at this point, that he's also advocating for the state to develop a very specific pothole fund, because they're recognizing that this is something that the majority of communities throughout the state will not be able to sustain. So I hear you and I agree with you. I just believe that the only way that we would be able to deal with it within our operational budget would be if we were making cuts beyond those that were supported by enrollment. And if we were doing that, it would just be, I think it would be irresponsible for us to be creating a level of, it would be a massive impact to our services.
I guess so.
Can I just follow up real quick?
Go ahead.
What is the balance in the special education reserve fund, the stabilization fund?
It's
So let
question.
me give you the number. I believe it's 300,000, but let me double check right now.
Yeah, we haven't been able to build that up in the way that I think was originally hoped to yet. That's part of our plan.
No, I'm just saying, you know, like to me, that would be a discussion point to utilize some of those funds if for some reason the state did not fully expend that or, you know,
Oh,
provide
oh,
a
yeah,
pot.
no, that's
You know, I definitely don't think any of us are advocating wholesale decimation of the public schools.
right. No, and I think, I mean, I guess I apologize. I think that's obvious, right? That's what the stabilization account is for. The problem being is that right now we still only have what Jenny had just said, which is just over $300,000 in it. So it's still a concern, but I agree with you, Ingrid. You're right. That's exactly what that should be used for.
Right. I just double checked, that's $308,000 in our special education reserve fund or
Great.
stabilization fund.
Jenny, that was 308.
Yes, 308,000.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in. We had asked for the non-general fund updates. So there's a I think I sent a link to a spreadsheet that we had gotten last year that listed all of the different revolving funds, school choice, circuit breaker, and sort of went back a few years. I don't know if you are able to update that so that we can see trends in those accounts.
Yes, I already updated those spreadsheet and PDF file in the Google Drive. I just added the last 3 questions you added into our whole Google document
Okay,
yesterday. So you should be able to see that in the last couple questions. Let me see what's the question number.
That is a good question. Christina, are you able
I'm
to
not
see that as a live document or are you looking at it as?
no, I'm looking at PDFs that get sent to me
Ooh.
from Dan O'Donnell. So unless
Okay.
I have that link somewhere that we're not
We had
aware of, I
updated
don't.
it. We did. And Jenny updated,
Okay.
changed those links as a live document. Is that, I don't have it right now on my screen. Is that something we could drop into the chat or something so that people have access to that live document?
Yeah, I actually just opened an email from Jenny SA, so I do have that on the screen, so I can share that if that helps. And
That would
then
be great.
I can send this out to everybody too. I apologize, I
Thank
didn't get a notification it was updated, but that's all.
Thank you.
So is it our questions document that's getting
the que-
updated?
It is,
Yes,
so
we have.
Okay,
it came over as a Google Doc and we have to use PDFs to post them online, so there was the breakdown there, but I will
Gotcha.
share this right now.
That
Okay.
makes sense.
I'm guessing it's at the end.
Yeah,
must
it's
be.
question 42.
42.
Yeah.
Are people
Okay.
able to access that link though? Maybe not. But well, all the committee members will have access to it. So you'll be able to look at that because that was helpful, Christina, when you shared that back with us to see what had been done. And then yes, Jenny then followed that
Okay.
format and then just reshared it.
Perfect. Okay. I mean, we can look at that later. I guess my point in asking for those updates is just so that the finance committee can see all of the other revenue sources
Mhm.
and how they're trending.
Yeah.
And this sort of leads me into my next question of a combination of school choice and full day kindergarten. In one of our questions, we got a new breakdown of the full day kindergarten and how that's going to get sort of the paying for it will get rolled out over the next few years. And that changed from the presentation we had last spring. Like specifically, a lot less school choice is being used, and the overall cost of full day kindergarten went down by like $200,000. So I wanted to, and I see that there is an answer here, but I wonder if somebody could just, so I'm not sitting here, reading
Absolutely.
it to myself. If
Yeah, you
somebody
don't-
could just go over
You
that,
bet.
yeah.
Absolutely. You don't need to read it and wait to read. We can talk about it. So what ended up happening, the projections that we had shared last year were the projections of what the entire cost would be. And so what we've found this year is that the actuals have decreased. So one of the things is that the projections that were included that specifically they were talking about staffing decreased. We didn't necessarily need to hire as many people as we had thought we needed to. We didn't need to use the classroom setups that we thought that might need to be happen when we were initially just projecting it out to see what would that cost be. And the reason why the school choice adjustment had changed is because the initial projections were also based on what we thought the end of year kindergarten tuition account would be. And that ended up being higher than what we had projected. And that money has to be spent first because it has to be spent for this purpose. So we have to spend that down. So we had to use that before we started going into school choice. So we ended up using less school choice only for that reason, because it is still our goal to try to figure out, okay, well, what is a more reasonable way in many ways to spend down the school choice account that we have. But that is the difference, is that last year we were talking about the projection, and then what you're seeing now is the actuals when we've actually implemented it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That makes sense. So I guess my comment there is the school choice balance is still growing.
Yes.
It's anticipated to be about 1.3 million at the end of FY23. And the amount of school choice that you need to use for your full day kindergarten plan has been reduced significantly. It went from 145 K this year down to, I think it was 25,000 or something. So I would like to see the school committee and the school administration maybe think about using some of those funds to fill this $266,000 gap.
Good idea.
I'm sure there are a lot of other things that you're considering, but I'd like to throw that in there as an option.
I understand that. I will say the difference here is that we really are using the school choice funds for one-time funds, and the 266 gap at this moment in time, it just isn't one-time funds, which is why I don't have a recommendation for cuts to bridge that gap. And so while that is something that we could do, it wouldn't solve the problem moving forward. It wouldn't make an adjustment that we need moving forward. And I do appreciate that. And we are looking at, different things that we do need that are truly one-time funds that we can be utilizing that for. That's not a recurring cost.
Okay, so I'm going to get that philosophy about the one-time funds versus operating. But I guess as an overall town budget, both, all departments, something's going to have to get cut. So if it's not something that's being cut out of the school department's, general functioning, then it's going to be somebody else's department. So I think we just need to think about that holistically, and maybe we need that 1 year gap to get us to something else, or
At the end of the day, those are conversations that might take place. I just haven't been led to believe that it's a question of needing cuts in other places either. That it's more like, one of the things that we've been talking about is we do need to wait and see what the state aid is going to provide us on March 1st.
Mhm.
And it might not be a question of needing cuts, but I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
True. And I think the other thing that I'll just add, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else, but there's a lot of it. There's quite a bit of uncertainty still left in this budget, simply because the governor's budget hasn't been released, and there's a lot of balls in the air still. And Dan and I have been talking about, hopefully on March 1st, to the stroke of midnight, when the governor's budget gets released, crossing fingers, we've got about 13 days before we need to get the finance committee book out. So we've kind of got a placeholder for March 6th, a March 6th meeting with minimally the finance committee, select board, possibly the school committee, to sort of talk about whatever comes out of that budget and whatever adjustments may or may not need to be made. So, you know, there is some time allocated there, but, you know, maybe as chairs of these three boards, maybe at some point we need to resurrect the chairs meetings to kind of talk about some of these things as they go along. So
Christina, I would
Jenny,
like to
sure.
add something over here, because the school choice, we can only use school choice for student-related direct service for student. That means if we use school choice to offset our general funds operating budget, so the purpose is limited. Because that 266,000, that's for our whole general funds difference between school requests and town allocation. So we cannot use school choice to offset like a facilities budget or, you know, building maintenance. It's just for the direct service for students. It's limited to, you know, certain purpose.
Right. No, I understand that, but I'm sure you can use it to offset $266,000 of, you know, legitimate expenses, I'm guessing, if it comes down to that.
I agree that if it comes down to that, there's certainly avenues that we can do. I just don't think it's necessarily going to come down to that.
Okay. Dennis?
Thank you. Dr. Chu, on that little nut, that 266,000 that you're trying to work with here, can you give us a summary of what the main cost drivers in that summary is, so we have an understanding of how urgent that is?
I can. I would say the two main driving factors to that are actually our comp reserve, looking at the contracts that have not yet been settled,
Yeah.
and the unknown transportation costs that are about to that we're looking at, which is again why it's difficult to say, oh, well, I can just not do this one thing, right? Or, you know, reduce this program and this, that's the complicated part of it.
I think I understand your position a little bit better now. Thank you. The other one is, the last question I have for now is, we're talking about state aid and awaiting state aid, which is always everybody holds their breath to see what it is, but our state aid funding has basically been fairly stagnant for a while. It usually comes out to about 20 million. Have you made at least a tentative assessment of how that's going to factor into your budget situation, or are you kind of keeping that open?
I mean, I would honestly, I would say that I haven't had a lot of conversations about the impact that the state aid has. That's been sort of the different conversations that I've been having with Dan, in understanding that I know that we don't normally end up having that conversation internally within the school district outside of the different grants that we know we already have access to. So I don't know if I can really answer that.
All right. That's it for me.
Dennis, you all set?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more question. I know we're looking at reducing the FTEs on the school side. I was just curious if you can tell us, without getting into negotiating and whatnot, how many of those would be retirees as opposed to layoffs, and if we're facing any liability against our budget for either case.
Oh, that's an excellent question. We are anticipating a few retirements, but yes, there will still. I think we are also, and I don't know, Dr. Cleary, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah.
She's done a phenomenal job taking over our human resources angle. I think we've been talking. We know that there's going to be some reduction, but we're anticipating being able to absorb some of it with retirements. I don't know the exact numbers.
And our goal is always to absorb all of it. That's not necessarily the case at this point, but it's still early in the year. So as Dr. Chu said, we have a couple of retirements. We also have a couple of staff members that were hired as interim, which means 1 year. So at the end of this year, there's no obligation for us to continue employment with them, and certainly them to us as well. So between those two, that has taken up several of the slots, and we just hope through some sort of attrition that we don't have to do formal layoffs, but it's still too early to say that all 6 are covered at this point.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? Jody?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that Dan did send out the updated financial model, and we actually have 94,000 surplus right now after receiving the Neshoba Tech number, which isn't solid yet, but we're pretty close. So anyway, I did ask Dan to consider putting this on the February 2nd, I believe is your meeting, budget meeting, to discuss that, because I know there's a lot of interest on the town side about a sustainability coordinator, and so at some point you all need to talk about the surplus and where you'd like to send it. So I just wanted to remind you of that. When we first did this budget with Chris and Jenny, we did not have that surplus at the time, so that's why the 266 was there. So we haven't changed it at this point.
Thank you.
If I can also, thank you, Jody. Can I add a comment to that?
Go right ahead.
I do also think another thing that did just happen recently, which I didn't highlight in here. Again, sometimes I forget and think that both committees would have the same information. But if with the recent opioid settlement, the recommendation that the working group had provided was that $20,000 of that go to support the Panorama program that we already we already included in our FY24 budget. So technically, if that ends up being approved and throughout that whole process, then that's one of those other avenues that shrinks that difference. It doesn't decrease our ask, but it allows us to then say, okay, well then we can use some of those funds that we had already attributed to the Panorama program to help us then shrink that the 266 number as well too. So just in terms of there seems to be a couple of different avenues that we could go to help with this gap.
Okay, thank you. Dennis?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I summarize and understand your situation. So financially, you're facing essentially 2 big challenges. One of them is the unknown outcome of the contract negotiations, which are going to affect that $266,000 that we're talking about. And the other one is the unknown regarding this 14% mandated expenditure from OSD regarding special education. So is that fair to say these are the 2 big issues that are confronting you at this time?
Well, yes, that's a good summary. I would also like to add that in the biggest of pictures, there's a third. And the third is our feasibility study, which is also which we're doing this year, which is going to give us a lot of information. And I know it's a conversation that people have been having, and some of their recommendations might be something that would go directly to capital, but it's also possible that some of their recommendations might not, actually it would all go to capital, but some of them might actually fall into debt exclusion, but some of their recommendations might not fall into debt exclusion, which is another. So there's really 3 things that I'm concerned about for the long term, but that's not the FY24 budget. So
now,
your summary for the FY24 budget is accurate.
All right, thank you. With the regards to the OSD status, I want to make sure that was passed in the latest Education Reform Act last year, or is this still in some sort of a process to be worked out in the legislature?
It's still in process. The legislature have not, it was a recommendation from OSD. It has not actually made its way into the budgets yet.
I get it. Okay, thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have questions? I'm not seeing anyone. I had one other question about the food service budget, and that this year seems to be the first year that you were, there's a $5,000 offset from the food service budget to against the business office, I believe it is.
Yes.
Could you give me a little background on how that number was calculated?
Because business office is responsible to the food service payroll, and also we help them to prepare the end of year report. It's part of our job. So like other revenue sources from revolving fund or from other grant. So because we provide a service for food service, that's why we are charging a small portion into the food service.
Right.
account.
Yep,
Mhm.
I understand that. I'm wondering how the $5,000 figure was arrived at. I know for like on the town side, there's the enterprise funds that Dan helped me with that sheet that gets filled out, the charge back, whatever, to figure out how much of, your time, Jody's time, everything else gets
Yeah,
calculated.
Yeah, it's like we charge a portion of the salaries for, say, payroll against, and we compare it to let's say the water enterprise payroll versus the entire town payroll. We take that percentage and apply it
Mhm.
against the direct and indirect costs. So there's a formula to it.
Yeah,
And that's
so
a
the point is
great
just that there's
question.
there's
Yeah.
a specific formula that gets calculated so that it's all sort of fair and equitable and whatever. And I know this is the first year, so I'm certainly not, I guess I'm just throwing it out there as,
Right, that's a
you may
really
want to
great
think in the
appreciate it.
future, like, does this $5,000 really cover it?
Mhm.
How are you arriving at that number so that it's fair? And I know I watched I think it was the last school committee meeting. And you mentioned starting to look at the food service budget in a future finance subcommittee meeting, which I think is probably a good idea, just because I have a lot of questions about how that works, how that food service budget works. It's usually sort of separate, but yet it seems like there's overlap, and so I think that'll be great to take a look at.
Yes, that's a great question and also a great suggestion. Currently, we have 50 FTE from food service program, and the total FTE is 788. So we should do like a percentage calculation in the future. So that will be a good discussion topic for us for the finance subcommittee in the future. We talk about revolving fund, the revenue coming in, the expenditure we spend, how much reserve we have, so we can use the revolving fund to offset the general fund's operating budget. So for food service also, we can do something similar in the future. That's really a great suggestion for us. Because right now it's just very small portion, but maybe we can increase a little bit in the future.
Okay, thanks. Jake?
Yeah, I have a question on the operations and facilities side of the house. It says that current budgeting levels do not include or support preventative maintenance. So just would appreciate some color on the strategy there.
Well, I mean, I will say, I like the way that you asked the question too, right? So the strategy there, we would love to be able to have more funds dedicated to preventative maintenance. And that's something that I know the school committee has been talking about for a number of years. It just hasn't been something that's been able to be a reality and be supported in the operating fund. So we still are living in a reactive state in terms of that. Now, the strategy that we are developing at this moment in time is through our feasibility study, right? So we're working with the SMMA, they've already done the entire exploration and tours of all the buildings, and they have very specific engineering reports. And out of that study, one of the things that we're going to have is a 10-year capital recommendation list that we're going to look at, that then we're going to talk about and see what do we think that we should prioritize, that then we'll bring to capital. And part of that will be looking at a more, I think, targeted preventative maintenance piece. But we're sort of in this year, it's a little bit of a limbo to wait until we get that information so that then we can really establish what we believe this master plan should be.
Yeah, That's helpful. Thanks.
And in the event that anybody didn't know, the draft of the different recommendations for the study, we're expecting in March, and we're expecting the final report in May. And that we'll have public discussions about that as well too. And then the school committee will work collaboratively to develop, okay, well then what do we think based on their information? What do we think are things that we should be prioritizing?
Andrea?
Hi, yeah, I mean, based on the feasibility study that the schools are doing right now reminds me, and I guess this is a question for Jody and Dan perhaps to look into. You probably don't have the answer tonight, but I'm wondering where we are on the buildings facility study that we did years ago for the town buildings, and that, you know, we periodically appropriated capital for those capital improvements, and what's left to be done there, because I think when we start to talk about the school's feasibility study, we should not forget that we also have a town feasibility study, and just to see where we are and how, you know, how all of that fits together with respect to capital. So just a comment to look at going forward.
Agree. Anyone else have any other questions? Any other board members? Dennis?
Last one, I promise. Yeah, there was a reference in the beginning about the substitute teachers, and they were talking about, my understanding from the discussion was that ARPA funds were being used to pay for these folks. Now we've had a lot of discussion about the use of ARPA funds for salary positions and things like that, or even payment. Can you explain how the ARPA funds are going to be applied, and what is the strategy at some point when the ARPA funds run out? How are you going to make up the difference?
Thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate that, because I clearly misinterpreted that. So what we did was we used previous ARPA funds in order to increase what was, for years, our substitute daily rate was $80 a day. And so we realized that was not, we weren't able to attract anybody for this position. We had a shortage. So we temporarily used ARPA funds last year to bring the daily rate up to $100 a day. That's the only use of the ARPA funds that we used on a temporary basis for that. We built into this year's current budget an increase to $90 a day, because last year when we did it, when we actually then connected and looked at all of the surrounding towns, although we knew that there was the $100 was a need in order to try to get the substitutes to support the large number that we had, because so many people were out due to COVID, we realized that it was actually higher than what the average was. So we reduced it for this year's current budget to $90 a day. But what we've learned through the fall, and so that's built into our current budget, right? So that's built in there. We're not using ARPA funds. It's sustainable. It's in our general fund.
Yep.
What we realized this fall was that our surrounding districts, maybe they saw us and blamed us, I don't know, but many of them also raised it to $100 or $125. So that's why we built in for next year for us to increase the daily rate to $100. So that's why that's increases there. We are no longer using ARPA funds for that. We're not continuing to. That was literally a one-time, we think we have this need, and then we had requested that support, and fortunately the town was able to help us there.
The reason I'm asking the question is I think one of the towns that you referenced that raised it is using the ARPA funds to do that, and they're going to be in for a little bit of a shock, I think, down the road.
They definitely will. So yeah, that's not helpful.
Good job. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else? I'm not seeing anything else. I would like to just thank Superintendent Chu and the school committee. I was really happy this year to see the way this budget process rolled out, as far as, you know, when the town manager gave her budget presentation back on December 13th, we had a complete budget to look at. And I think that's one of the first times that the timelines have lined up so that the finance committee can look at not only the town side departments, but the details of the school budget in one whole look. So thank you very much for making that happen. I know that is very difficult for the schools to anticipate. It's such an early date in the year for the following year, but so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And you know, that said, I know that there are you know, there's a lot of outstanding items still left. We've touched on the governor's budget not being rolled out yet, the out of district tuition, yada yada yada. I could go on and on about a lot of things that are still up in the air, not only for the school department, but for other departments as well. And I feel confident that as we move forward, the three boards here will be able to collaborate and work together to work through those issues over the next couple of months. So if nobody has anything else, I think, oh, Jody.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I just like to say that both, I'm sorry, I'm talking to my Google person over there, but that both Chris and Jenny and Carrie and everybody have been very cooperative, and we have a really great working relationship. So I want to thank them too for making the process go so smoothly. So
Thank you. And I also like to publicly just say thank you, Jody, because I'm delighted that we get to say that multiple times, right? Because you're still with us. So that's great. And I did just notice that Kristen is with us. So I'm really excited to be working with Kristen moving forward too. So welcome, Kristen. And you know, I appreciate Christine. I appreciate those words. And I also am looking forward to the collaboration.
Well, thank you. So I think unless anyone, I'll give one last chance. Anyone else have any other questions that they've thought of? So I think that wraps it up. I think we have you potentially on a future agenda should anything else come up. I think it's in a couple of weeks.
I think that's on the 2nd. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So again, thank you, everyone. We will move on to approving our meeting minutes.
good night, everyone.
If everyone wants to, yeah.
Right, Jody.
This is your cue.
Yeah, we'll let you have your meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And from the select board, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second? All those in favor? Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night,
everybody.
Thanks for that reminder, Andrea. I need a motion to adjourn for the school committee as well.
So moved.
Second.
In a second. I don't know who got there first. I don't know. I'm giving it to Gloria. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that's enough. I think that's 4. All right. Adjourned. Thanks, folks. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, next on our agenda are the meeting minutes from January 12th. Anyone have any edits on those? And if not, could I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. In a second?
Second.
Great. Now I can't see everyone, so I'm gonna try this. Okay, there we go. All right. So all in favor, I'll call Hari.
Aye.
Ingrid,
Hi.
Tom,
Aye.
Dennis,
Aye.
Beth,
Aye. Shelby.
Aye.
and Jake.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So that passes. Our boards and committee updates, again, is just kind of there in case anything has come up in the last week or so. I'm thinking no, since we're in the middle of budgets again. Next, future meetings. So the list is there. I had mentioned earlier that there's a possibility for a March 6th or something in that time frame after the governor's budget is released. So just kind of keep that in mind and check your email for something coming up. I think that's about it.
Yeah, it's just
Dan, I'm
That's an
good,
early
right? I
meeting.
didn't forget anything. Dennis?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Out of the last two meetings, I think we should be keeping our eyes on a couple of things. Number one, that 22% rate hike for the water, and this 14% OSD mandate. I think if these were to come together at the same time, it could be a very painful experience. So I just think we need to watch that and keep our eyes on it.
Mhm. I agree. I actually did write an email to Jim Arcero, just from myself on that 14% increase. Ingrid?
Doesn't hurt, can't hurt.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know the School Business Association, we have all been encouraged to have our districts send letters. The mass superintendents has encouraged that. Some of the information I've received just professionally on this is that DESE really had no idea this was happening because OSD is part of the governor's administration. It's not, it's straight in the executive office of administration and finance. So it's really, the legislature would potentially provide funding to kind of bail it out, but they don't approve those increases. So.
Can I ask, Ingrid, can I ask you a question about that? So in other words, what this is it's basically a mandate being promulgated by a state agency as opposed to the legislature?
Correct.
Well, okay. Gee.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I think, as much pressure as we from our own community can put on our legislatures. Many of the legislatures weren't really aware of it, we're finding. So I think perhaps a letter from our full committee would be helpful as well.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, that just brought up, we talked with Mike Wells last week about some of the requirements for cyber insurance, things like that. So it may be a good idea to start kind of tracking those mandates.
Yep.
The increases that are based on mandates that aren't just, we'd like to have it, or, even, the way we track salary increases, I think as a general population, it's easy to look at the staff and say, oh, that must be where all the money's going. But, I think there are things that are required of all of the departments, that add some stress. And, going back to that rate increase, there are things that are definitely out of the control of the water department, and they're looking at some unfunded mandates. And just that may be a good thing to include in the budget narrative at the very least, is, recognizing that, and, keeping level services is costing lots and lots more these days. So
Yeah.
that's just I
agree.
an observation.
And maybe we could even put that on a future agenda if we wanted to discuss as a group some of these things.
Well, you may want to discuss that with, if these things continue, you may want to discuss that with the Board of Selectmen. And you can actually have the state representative come in and talk to all of us about what's going on. That's another option.
That's an idea. Ingrid?
Just on the unfunded mandate, I know, Dennis, you may remember, it's been a number of years, but there is a whole list that some group put together of unfunded mandates. I'm sure it needs to be updated, but it's quite eye-opening. I'll see if I can dig it out.
I think CLT did it. I think, yeah. Danny, have you got it?
No, I do think Jody has it, but way back when, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we actually had representatives from the state senator's offices and the state reps offices come out and we talked to them about it all. It didn't amount to a whole lot, but we did get to discuss it with them at least.
I have my own little running list, so to compare, every so often I jot something down. But that's a good idea. If anyone else has anything else that we want to talk about later, we can get it on an agenda so that we're a little more free to discuss it and actually do something about it. I don't want to go off on a tangent here when we're, not really under a specific agenda item. So, but let me know and we can add something.
Okay.
But I think are we good to adjourn? So I can get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, just wave yourself out and we will
Hey.
call that unanimous. Sounds
That's
good,
nice.
looks
Good to
good.
meet
All right.
Thank
See
you
you
very
everyone next
much.
week.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.